Political chaos in France. Is there a revolution coming? Well, it looks like the votes have destroyed Macron's awful presidency just before the Paris Olympics, with the hard left band of communists and Greens likely to form a coalition government. What a fool Macron is for going down this path. However, despite the MSM coverage in the UK, including Emily Maitlis getting the wrong end of the stick as usual, Marine Le Pen and Jordan Bardella's national rally was the biggest party. They received the most votes. The problem is the anti-democratic French political system, even worse than first past the post here in the UK, has effectively deprived citizens of the government they really want. But only for now. I believe this result sets Le Pen up perfectly to win the presidency in 2027, everything that Macron doesn't want. But let's head now to the south of France to get the best on-the-ground analysis that you will not get from the mainstream media. Leigh Evans is chairman and founder of the think tank facts4you.org, the most prolific researcher and publisher of Brexit facts in the world for the last 8 years. And Leigh, thank you for your patience tonight. We've obviously been dealing with technical issues, so I'm so grateful that you've held on because it was so important we speak to you today. It's interesting, isn't it, Leigh? Initially, this result was presented as a big loss for Le Pen, but I would argue it makes her presidency even more likely. Where are you on that?
Firstly, let me say it's a pleasure to be on your show, Dan, and we will support anyone that believes in freedom of speech. Doesn't matter if something comes out of your mouth that we don't agree with. It's freedom of speech that is the important thing, and that's why I'm on. That's why I'm on today. And you want to talk about the French elections, and I've got some things to say about that for certain. I'm going to start with what the BBC had to say, and I've got their headline in front of me here. French left celebrates as far right faces surprise defeat. So that's the take that the BBC had on it. Mm-hmm. And you made this point a little while ago about how you're not going to hear some of the stuff that you're broadcasting on conventional channels. And this is fairly typical of what you get if you're an average member of the public tuning in to the BBC or even Sky News or ITN. So what really happened? I think that's probably what your viewers want to know. What actually happened in the French elections? Well, Marine Le Pen's party scored the highest vote share of any other party. Not only that, but the other parties had to line up against her in coalitions. They had to group to try and overcome her. And yet she, with her single party, still got more votes than the combined groups of, in Macron's case, another 4 parties. In the case of the Popular Front, which is a far left grouping, some 5 parties, but she still won overall. But you're not going to hear that on the BBC.
No, indeed you're not. Indeed you're not. I mean, they are presenting quite the opposite. The issue, I guess, you've got, Leigh, is twofold. Firstly, you have a French electoral system specifically designed to stop someone like Le Pen wresting control. And the second thing you've got is Macron flapping about desperately, attempting to save his presidency. Do you think he's done that?
No, I don't. France is in deep trouble this evening. It has a major problem because it effectively has no government. It's in chaos, and it's not only me saying that, but it's senior political figures in France who are saying that. So I think we have to recognise this. I've got a quote for you, if you want. France's equivalent of the Chancellor of the Exchequer in the UK, who's just been ousted, by the way. He's a guy called Bruno Le Maire. And Bruno Le Maire is absolutely widely known across France. He's pretty much a household name. And he came out today about the election and he said the following, and I'm translating into English because I assume not all of your viewers speak French.
I certainly don't.
I'm sure you're fluent in French yourself, Dan, but...
no, as the song goes, I can't
said,
speak French, but I let the funky music do the talking. That's a little pop music reference.
So what he said, and this is quite serious if you listen to this, he said, the most immediate risk is a financial crisis and France's economic decline. The second risk is an ideological fracture of the nation. Now, that's pretty serious stuff from a man like Bruno Le Maire. He's not somebody given to hyperbole necessarily. And for him to say that gives your readers, your viewers, some idea of the trouble that France is in. Effectively, there is very little chance of them putting a government together because the parties that came together for these coalitions pretty much hate each other. And there's very little chance, in our opinion, as seasoned observers of these things, very little chance that these parties will actually serve together in some form of coalition government. If they do, it won't last. There you go. That's my prediction for the Dan Wootton show.
I think you're right. And by the way, what a nasty guy Macron is too, plunging France into this chaos just before the Olympics. But look, I want to talk about specifically Le Pen's vote, Leigh, because it's incredible. If you look back and look at her vote in the second round, dating back to 2007, when it obviously wasn't Marine Le Pen, but in 2007, 0.08% of the vote, 0.08% of the second vote. In 2012, up to 4%. 2017, 9%. So still a minor party. We saw that big shift in 2022 when the tectonic plates of politics in France shifted. And of course, it was post-Brexit too, up to 17%. But Leigh, in 2 years, the vote has gone from 17% to 37%. So I want to talk to you about that on two levels. Firstly, 37% of the French population are not racist fascists, are they? That's the first thing I want you to tackle. And then the second thing is, does this show you what is about to come to the UK? Is Nigel Farage about to do the same thing and end up the biggest party in British politics?
I think that's a very good question, actually, Dan. The answer is here in France, where I'm speaking to you from at the moment, there has been a radical shift in the political landscape over the last 10 years or more. And it's particularly interesting in the last few years, last 2 or 3 years. One of the reasons for that is the subject of immigration and illegal immigration as well as legal immigration. People have now got to the point in France where they've had enough right across France. Now, we are also seeing that in the UK because a few years ago, people like Nigel Farage was pretty much on his own. We were talking about it, but he was on his own politically, talking about that issue in the UK. And it wasn't polite to discuss it in the mainstream media. Now it's in the mainstream media almost every day. The same is true in France. But what's happened in France is all of these other parties ganging up against Marine Le Pen to prevent her from forming a government. And my assessment of it right now is that she won't be able to form a government. But does she care? I don't think so. She's a bit like Nigel. Nigel had that he re-entered the political arena for the next 5 years to build a movement. Well, I think Marine Le Pen is looking ahead to the 2027 presidential elections in France. She came close last time to defeating Macron, and it looks to us that she might have a pretty good chance in 2027 of defeating Macron, if indeed Macron is still the president by that time, and that's still not certain.
How does it work in the French political system if Macron did step down before the end of his term? Does there have to be an immediate presidential election?
Yes, there does. It would be an absolute rarity if that were to happen. But then it was an absolute rarity for Macron to dissolve government, which he did 4 weeks ago. An extraordinary thing for him to do. One might say almost an act of petulance as a result of the European elections. He didn't like that because he was trounced in those elections. So he then calls this election, and nobody in France, none of the political commentators can quite put their finger on why, other than the fact it was a fit of pique, French pique. Pique, by the way, not P-E.
Yes, no, I know all about fits of pique today. So the thing that I'm really interested in, though, is the psychological relationship and the battle potentially going on between Marine Le Pen and the man who we thought might be French Prime Minister today, Jordan Bardella, who I believe is 28 years old. He's viewed as being more palatable, a little bit more acceptable. He doesn't have the baggage of the Le Pen name. And there are some suggestions that he might pull a Macron and effectively try to usurp Le Pen, the woman who has created him and given him that platform. Is there any chance of that, do you think? Because I know publicly they remain completely united.
If you want my gut feel, it's just a personal opinion. I wouldn't be surprised. The man is extremely ambitious. He's very talented. As you say, he's 28 years old, but you should hear him speak. He is quite impressive for a 28-year-old. And will he possibly split from Marine Le Pen in terms of supporting her? Possible. It won't split the party, I don't think. But will he stand against her in the 2027 presidential elections? That's 3 years away. He'll be 31, which, if he won, would make him the youngest president in history. But is it possible? Do you know what? I wouldn't bet against it. Let's put it that way.
So Le Pen doesn't have an iron grip on the National Rally?
She does, in a sense, in that she's got a long history, and she has taken the National Rally to a level that it's never before seen. So that's important. She's managed the process. She's had to blend some of her policies a little bit. She used to be completely anti-EU. She was if you like, a Frexit proponent. But she had to drop that in order to get more votes, and she's done that very successfully. It is misunderstood in the UK, and I just need to make this one point to you, Dan, for your viewers. It's misunderstood in the UK. People think that Marine Le Pen and the Rassemblement National, the national rally that she heads up, is a right-wing party. But if you look at their policies, some of them are decidedly left policies. They're policies that Nigel Farage, for example, wouldn't be seen dead proposing. And were these policies to be implemented in France, it would have a dramatic effect on the economic fortunes of France. So are there similarities with the UK and what's gone on with Nigel Farage? Definitely. I can cite some of those. Are there differences? Oh, yes, most definitely. But
yeah, indeed.
If you just want me to comment on one similarity, it is the mismatch between the vote share and the number of seats. And this is something that is now so extreme that although I'm not a big proponent of saying, oh, everything is now changing, because I've seen it all before. But in this case, I think that there is going to be some kind of manoeuvring on this, because Nigel Farage, for heaven's sake, he got 5 MPs in the British Parliament. Put that up against a party he defeated, the Lib Dems, who got 72 seats.
It's a scandal. It's an absolute scandal, and it's an outrage, and it's anti-democratic. And the thing is, Leigh, is that we've got 2 political systems in the UK and France that were built for 2-party systems, and that both major parties wanted to keep going. And in the UK, they still want to keep it going. But the problem is, France and the UK are no longer 2-party states. We are sick of the uni-party. Obviously, France has already overturned that system. I think we're close to doing so here in the UK as well. And there has to be a serious discussion about electoral reform, because the problem is, it's really hardly, when you look at these 2 sets of results out of France and out of the UK, to think anything other than this is an anti-democratic system designed to deny the will of the people. And in the UK, for example, there's this outrage that because Nigel only has 5 MPs, Nigel Farage only has 5 MPs, he's going to get a tiny fraction of the state funding compared to the Liberal Democrat Party, because they have lots of MPs but a much lower share of the vote. So I feel like there has to be a tipping point here where the public say, no, enough. We have to drive the move to proportional representation, which I think is the solution.
Yeah, I sense, and it is only just a gut feel, but I sense that something is going to have to change here. And the reason I say that is simply because the results are so extreme. They're extreme in France, they're extreme, even more extreme in the UK. And I thought you might be interested in how Europe is, as a whole, is taking the French election results. Do you want me to?
Please.
I'm going to give you just one comment out of many across Europe about the results. It's fair to say that Europe, or the EU rather, breathed a sigh of relief yesterday about the results, because the establishment, the EU establishment, were all absolutely anti-Marine Le Pen. And I've just picked out one quote from just one leader of one country, and that country is a country that your viewers will know very well, and that's Spain. And Spain has a prime minister that nobody will have heard of, I'm sure, but his name is Pedro Sanchez. And he talked about the rejection of the far right, not just in France, but in the UK too. So in other words, he was lumping Nigel Farage and the Reform UK party into this far-right grouping that is beloved of the establishment. And what he actually said on Twitter this morning was he welcomed France and the UK's decisive commitment to a social left that addresses people's problems with serious and brave policies. Again, I've translated that from the Spanish. He then went on to say that there can be no agreement or government with the quote-unquote far right, and that the United Kingdom, quote, the United Kingdom and France have said yes to progress and social advancement and no to the regression of rights and freedoms, end quote. I would argue personally, because I'm chair of a number of non-partisan organizations that happen to believe in freedom, which is one of the reasons that I agreed to come on your show today, Dan. I would simply argue that what that Spanish Prime Minister had to say was absolute rubbish, that the freedoms, in fact, are far more likely under other governments than they are under socialist governments.
Absolutely. I would say that was a completely intellectually dishonest argument. But I would also say to the Spanish Prime Minister, let's have this conversation in 5 years' time, because I have a feeling you will have governments in both the UK and France that are answerable to the people. I don't use the term far right because it is utterly ridiculous. These are maybe centre-right. As you say, when it comes to Le Pen, certainly not economically, but what they are is they are patriotic movements that put the French and the British people first at their heart. Leigh, I just want to get a final word. Oh, sorry.
Just one more thing. If ever you want a speaker on your show, a friend of mine is Monsieur Brexit, and I'm quite certain he'll give you even more insight into the way that the movements are growing in power across Europe. And he, amazingly for a Frenchman, speaks excellent English.
I like that. But look, I just want to get a final word from you, Leigh, over what we are fearing in the UK is going to be an armada, or a starmada as they're calling it, because Sir Keir, the Labour Prime Minister, in one of his first acts as Prime Minister, has scrapped the Rwanda scheme, which means people smuggling gangs have effectively been empowered. They have been waiting for the election of a Labour government and the hope that the Rwanda scheme would be thrown out. And we saw it today. They started to come in. Numbers are already up. I mean, I'm not trying to defend the Conservative record on this, but at least they were trying to get a deterrent in place, which is what the National Crime Agency here in the UK had said was necessary. Now, one of the things that Starmer talks about, I think personally he's delusional, is getting a better deal and a better relationship with France over all of this. But given the political turmoil going on right now in Paris, is there any hope of that?
No, none at all. The political naivety, whether it's knowing or whether they're just spinning for the British public, I don't know. But there is no chance of anything happening. We've just produced a report which won't appear until tomorrow, but your viewers can have an exclusive on this, which shows the extraordinarily small number of migrants that have been repatriated within the EU. So the idea that the EU is this marvelous creation where you can have an agreement under what was called the Dublin regulation, by the way, where France, for example, can send its migrants back to Italy. No, that hasn't happened at all. And we're producing a report overnight on this to show that. So if you translate that into UK politics, what it means is that there's no chance that Macron or the EU Commission are going to do any kind of sensible deal with Sir Keir Starmer's government in terms of repatriating migrants. Secondly, when it comes to the policies of Sir Keir Starmer, well, they've all been tried and they haven't worked. What he's done is he's canned the Rwanda scheme, which was possibly the only hope that we had of persuading migrants it's not worth the candle to come to because you're going to be sent to Rwanda. Well, that's now gone, completely gone. Some of the policies that are coming out now from the Labour government, we're beginning to see the full extent of them, and I wonder if you look at the election results in the UK, it wasn't a vote for Starmer. He got 1.7% more, I think. It wasn't a vote for Labour. It was a 20% drop in the Conservative vote, partly because of reform, but not only. An awful lot of people just stayed at home. So, major shifts right across the continent.
Absolutely. And as ever, I would argue the political elites have taken completely the wrong message about where the public are at. But thank you so much for sticking with us tonight. Leigh Evans, the chairman and founder of facts4eu.org, with fascinating insight from the south of France. Thank you so much, Leigh.
You're most welcome.
If you enjoyed that video, don't forget to subscribe to Dan Wootton Outspoken, where you'll get much more of it. See you soon.